Good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody here. If you're joining us online, we welcome you to the Church of Christ in Bridgeport. We are beginning our study of the Old Testament Sunday morning Bible study at the moment. So I encourage you to have your Old Testament survey books pulled up. We're starting a new chapter. There should be some new copies that are printed in the back. There should be some more on the printer, but there should be some copies in the back. You can grab a copy if you have not, as we're starting a new chapter this morning with a new month, and hopefully we'll be able to continue on and read a lesson from God's Word. At this time, we would like to open up with a word of prayer, and after which we will continue our lesson. Let's go our Father in prayer this time. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this morning. You've allowed us to see this day. We thank you for this new month, and that you have kept us safe, Father, throughout this year. And Father, in all things, you've been with us. We are grateful for this morning. And Lord, today that we had the opportunity to rise and be here and part of this congregation, Father, and be part of your body. Father, we pray as we open up this word this morning, that we'll be able to glean a lesson from it, that we'll be able to reflect on ourselves, the lessons that you have set aside thousands of years ago, that we can apply to our individual and collective lives, Father, and be able to gather against them. Father, be with those that are still on their way, on their travels, be with those that are joining online, if they're not here physically, Father, be with them and help in all things, Father. We thank you for all your word, and we thank you for all the blessings, and in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. All right. So we are continuing on with a new chapter this month. Last month we focused on the minor prophets as we closed out last week. Brother Ricardo did a great job of concluding the summarization of the chapter altogether of the minor prophets, looking at the emphasis that each of them brought and the unique role each played in bringing us into the mind of God. Now, in this lesson we're continuing on is going to be continuing on the story, right? We're continuing on to the next chapter of the Old Testament survey and continuing on to the story of the Israelites, the chosen people of God. As mentioned, there's new copies on the back of the hall. If you do need a digital copy, you can let know in the chat, or you can email at cocbpt@gmail, and we'll be able to forward you a digital copy as well. The reading of this week focuses on a recap of kind of how we left the Israelites last. The minor prophets were kind of a little tangent in a way as far as the continuing the story, because the minor prophets kind of jump all over the place, because it jumped all the way from the early days of the slow degradation of the Israelites through all the way to the fall of Jerusalem, right? And then continuing on from the return back to Jerusalem after exile. So because the minor prophets go in all sorts of different timelines, the original timeline that we have followed has been literally all the way since the King of Judah, if you remember, looking at what happened last, which was the fall of Jerusalem. We looked at the last king of Jerusalem, right, King Zedekiah, and that's kind of where our story starts this chapter and this morning. We're continuing on looking at 2 Chronicles, the end of 2 Chronicles, and we're also looking at the book of Jeremiah, which has a way detailed account because Jeremiah was there during the time of the fall of the kingdom of Israel. So that's where the reading comes from. Just for a summary, I am going to do a short reading from 2 Chronicles, which is kind of the lesson text for this morning. If you have your Bibles with you, I'll be doing a short reading, kind of summarizing where we left off from 2 Chronicles chapter 36. So that'll be a reading for this morning to kind of get us into the mindset of where we will be as far as our story goes. So the reading this morning will be from 2 Chronicles chapter 36, starting in verse 11. So let's read. It says, Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord his God, and he did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke the word of the Lord. He also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him take an oath in God's name. He became stiff-necked and hardened his heart, and would not turn to the Lord, the God of Israel. Furthermore, all the leaders of the priests and the people became more and more unfaithful, following all the detestable practices of the nations, and defiling the temple of the Lord, which he had consecrated in Jerusalem. The Lord, the God of their ancestors, sent word to them through his messengers again and again, because he had pity on his people and on his dwelling place. But they mocked God's messengers, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets until the wrath of the Lord was aroused against his people, and there was no remedy. He brought up against them the king of the Babylonians, who killed their young men with the sword in the sanctuary, and did not spare young men or young women, the elderly, old, or the infirm. God gave them all into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. He carried to Babylon all the articles from the temple of God, both large and small, and the treasures of the Lord's temple, and the treasures of the king and his officials. They set fire to the God's temple and broke down the walls of Jerusalem. They burned all the palaces and destroyed everything of value there. He carried into exile to Babylon the remnant who escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and his successors until the kingdom of Persia came to power. The land enjoyed its Sabbath rest. All the time of his desolation it rested until the 70 years were completed in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. So, as mentioned, this kind of summarizes where we last left off the Israelites, as in it was sadly the fall of the Israelites. We see Zedekiah, the last king, kind of rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, even though he swore an oath in the name of God. And in fact, Jeremiah continually asked Jeremiah to not fight against the Babylonians, that this was an inevitability, that, as mentioned in scriptures here, that the act of the people against God had got to a point so far that being conquered by another nation was an inevitability, that God had risen up this kingdom from the south. And this warning had not just been there for this generation, but for multiple generations ahead. There have been prophets after prophets saying this, that turn your heart towards God, or the consequences will be from the neighboring nations. And sadly, that kind of came to fruition. Jeremiah was that last prophet who had this opportunity to try to turn the hearts of the king, try to turn the hearts away from the false prophets, try to turn the hearts away from the people that were kind of influenced by the surrounding nations. But sadly, that was not the case. Like we see the last king of Judah, Zedekiah, where he rebels against the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, after he's told that the fall of Jerusalem is an inevitability after the failure of the Israelites to be loyal to God and his commandments. And as we see in the description, I mean, there are all other accounts that our reading for this month kind of goes into, where in Jeremiah's case, you see so much more detail because he's physically in the city when it's being sacked, right? We see more details of what happened to the king itself, where, when he's trying to escape, he's caught, and his future offspring are killed in front of him, and his eyes is gouged out, and he's forever a prisoner till his death. And the temple of God in detail is shown how it's sacked and burned down, and the walls of Jerusalem are broken down, and the people are taken into exile in Babylon. And that's kind of where the chapter starts today, looking at Babylon. But kind of before we focus altogether on this idea of Babylon, we kind of wanted to get an idea of being in that same mindset, right? The focus of this chapter, it says receiving punishment as prophesied. That's the lesson concept. And talking about Babylon, we are able to see Babylon's glory, but also to see Babylon's fall, because as in the prophets that have spoken about the fall of Jerusalem, they continue to also speak on the fall of the nations that conquered Jerusalem, right? They talk a lot of the consequences of not just the nations that have turned their hearts away from God and their own people, but also the people around that are also in conflict. In minor prophets we saw last week, also there's many prophets that spoke on all the kingdoms and the judgment that is coming, because judgment is not ours, but the judgment is God's, and it is for everybody, as in there's no exception to say, okay, because God used Babylon to conquer Jerusalem, Babylon is not going to face its own consequences, because it is. Okay, Babylon is not of God's people, and Babylon very famously has their own version of idol worshiping and turning their hearts away from God. So that's where Babylon in this chapter starts, and the continuing chapter kind of goes a little bit more and more in detail, right? And the next chapter focuses on the king Nebuchadnezzar himself, and he has a big reign, and then the prophet Daniel comes into place, and his role in exile, right, which is a key focus of these chapters in understanding, right? Thousands of Israelites, in fact, they give specific number accounts of were taken from their homes and relocated all over ancient Babylon. And the thing about it is that this is not the first time it happened. In fact, if we look at the prophet Daniel, he was part of the first raid that was taken in the fall of Jerusalem. As in, it was like years after when the actual city fell. The first time they only took individuals that were healthy, and plundered all the resources from the temple, but not everything was destroyed, because you see, there's still a chance that things could turn around. That's the tragedy of it, that there's still a chance that the city could be saved, but it continues to fall. And now these thousands of Israelites are now all over in a foreign country. They're surrounded by a different culture with different gods, right? And we see that some Israelites that choose to resist Babylon, right, by revolting or withdrawing from all their customs and culture, while there are others that kind of gave in, kind of adopting to the Babylonian way, the concept of life, and even accepting their new gods as their own, right? We see that when there is a change in the rulers, as mentioned in 2 Chronicles, when the king of Persia rises, they have an opportunity to go back, but not everybody goes back because they've been accustomed to this new land in Babylon. And sometimes we might think that that's the only two options, that either you can rebel or you can kind of just succumb to the other culture, right? But the prophet Jeremiah, when we read, and as we have read before, had told them, the people, to do something radically different, which was that they were to settle in Babylonia, build houses, plant gardens, grow families, but most surprisingly, to seek the well-being of Babylon and pray to the Lord on his behalf to return them back, right? And that was the reason many despised Jeremiah, is because he was saying, hey, Babylon is going to conquer you, and you have to come to peace with this, because it's too late to be able to change back. But now you have this opportunity to grow the next generation. As it says, it took 7 years. And 7 years is literally just one generation apart, right? And this is a pattern that we see continually, where God has this ability to start anew and start fresh. And that is that opportunity for the people that are in exile, is that the generation that has sinned, they are gone into exile. But the next generation is to prepare for the return back to home, right? And that's so many of the prophets that came, as we talked about the minor prophets, that focus specifically on that, is focused on rebuilding what is broken. So anyway, This was that third way that Jeremiah described in what the people were to do. It was to neither compromise nor revolt, right? And we see that this idea is explored much more into the prophet Daniel, right? Where Daniel is part of the Babylon kingdom. In fact, he is one of in a much higher place, but still has his loyalty towards God, as in he is still firm when it comes to things that are against God, that he's not willing to flex, he's not willing to bow down to, right? And there's consequences of that, but him and his friends like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we see this concept of being firm, right? And not compromising the word of God, even in a foreign land, is something that we see a concept that is building. And this idea of being exiled being a combination of this loyalty and a subversion, right? Loyalty, but still with subversion, is a fundamental aspect of understanding Christianity itself. Right? As we read in the Minor Prophets, there's always this mention of this true kingdom of peace, right? That is the message of hope that every prophet, even the one that has to live through the darkest of times, still continues to bring up this message of hope for this new true kingdom of peace that is coming about. But the people that are living in it, they don't see it. And because he's not talking about a physical kingdom, right? Because there will always come another oppressor. Even after Babylon, we see that the Israel, even the ones that do get to go back home, are still ruled by the successors of Babylon. And we see this continually over and over, because the kingdom that is promised by God to these prophets is one of restoration. And when we talk about restoration, we're not just talking about restoration of this one people, but going back all the way to the restoration of our origin, right? That's going literally to the first pages of the Bible, where humanity is living in this perfect harmony with God, right? There's only one condition, that they should trust and follow God's commandment, but that's one thing that they don't do. If they don't follow God's commandment, and the consequences is banishment from that unity, right? From that garden. And that is the beginning of that original exile, that we see continual patterns that is reoccurring with the Israelites, right? That they were given this gift of this promised land, and were able to stay there, but with one condition, which is be faithful to the Lord and the covenant that they have with God, right? But they didn't. And that's where the exile comes from the Israelites also. So to highlight that this restoration that every minor prophets that we have heard of, the major prophets, continue to bring up, that restoration is the restoration of us all back into the origin of our Creator, right? So that's the mindset. And the people that have that mindset, right, that even that know this concept, they live in exile, but they always have their mindset set to go back to their true home, right? Even at the time of Jesus Christ, we see that the empire that was ruling was Rome, as in it was just another empire. Like, it might not have been Babylon, but it's the same concept, and it was ruled by Caesar. And some Israelites wanted to resist, right? When we looked at the disciples, there were some disciples that were always about fighting back, right? But there were others that gave in and adopted Roman culture and as God. But if you see Jesus, he always carries the same idea of the subversive loyalty, right? Where he says, oh, it's fine to even pay taxes to Caesar. He says, give him back his coins. But he also says, do not mistake Caesar for God, right? God is the one who deserves your total life and allegiance. It is to say that you are to be part of the nation because you are in exile, right? You are to follow the rules of the nation that is around you, but yet you should not lose focus of where your true home is, of where your true allegiance is, right? And that's why Jesus has these radical ideas of even love and bless your enemies, right? Because that's what Jeremiah talks about when he talks about Babylon. It's like, you are not to curse these people because these people are of your own consequence. As in, because you have failed to have that covenant with God, That is why these people are conquering you, right? And that is the will of God. That is not because these are evil people. I mean, they are in their own right, but as in to say, that's why that concept of loving your enemies and blessing your enemies is important. Because Jesus always speaks out against the corruption aspect of it, right? Of Jerusalem and of Rome, because the corruption is the sin, right? The sin is the thing that corrupts the people. So when there are individuals in your life that you consider enemies, don't hate the person, but hate the sin that's with them, right? Because that is that concept that is profound, because when you go back in history looking at Babylon, there's a lot of sin in there, but there's also redemption. Because Nebuchadnezzar, when we talk about the character, it's a very complex character. It's not a one-note, this is a bad guy kind of character. Because there's always complexity in things. Last week, I think Brother Ricardo, when he talked about when the prophet Jonah, right, did not want to help the people of Nineveh, he forgot the fact that they were still God's people, that they were still creations of God, right? And sometimes that mindset even mires the prophets, as you can see, where the people focus more on what justice and what right is in their mind, but not what in God's mind, right? Because his thoughts are not our thoughts. So when he sees judgment, it's a judgment that we place on ourselves to say, this is how I would judge, but that's not your call to make. So Jesus has that same mindset, that he encourages his people to always have this mindset of being in exile, right? In a different type of exile. In fact, his apostle Peter continues to call the followers of Christ foreigners and exiles, right? Because that's that same mindset. He's telling the people to respect the authorities in whatever place you happen to live, to honor and love the people, but he reminds continually that this is not their true home, right? That they're still, physically might still be, mentally still be living in Babylon, but Babylon is not the home. In the Bible, Babylon continually comes up almost like a symbol that describes any form of human intuition that demands allegiance to the adulterous redefinition of what is good and evil. As in, whatever place you go in, their form of morality, their form of what is right and wrong starts to impede on what you think is right and wrong, or what God thinks is right and wrong. And that's a continual pattern that we see, right? Because that's why we're asked to be transformed in the world, because the pattern of the world is continually corrupting you to see what is right for the world as what is right in the eyes of God. But that is not always true, right? That is why God asks us to be respectful, but not to follow your allegiance to the world, right? Not to subject yourself to the pattern of this world. And that is kind of comes back to this whole idea of looking at Babylon, right? Is how do I seek a well-being of, that's complexity, because how do I seek the well-being of Babylon, right, while still my allegiance is to someone greater? That is as Jesus followers, this is a tension that's continually occurring between this idea of loyalty and subversion, because that is why we're here every week, right? Is because every time we failed to live as God's sacrifice, to see worthy of the sacrifice, we are to remember, right, and to ask forgiveness. This is to recenter us back, because this is a continual struggle, because when you're living in the world, and when you're living in a human body, it is always going to mire you into the pattern of the world and the pattern of the human body, right? This idea of self-preservation is very hard to get out of. That's why God asks worshipers in spirit, because the spirit is something that is eternal, that is not only of this moment, that is not of self-pleasure. The spirit is something that is beyond ourselves. And these are the things that God asks us to transform our body and our mind to. So all this prelude, this was a lot, but all this prelude is bringing us back to this idea of Babylon, right? We know that it's not only a physical place, but a symbolic place for God's people. And that's the same then, and that's the same that it's today. So when we look at Babylon for the next few weeks, we don't want to just look at it almost like a historical aspect, but we want to see it in terms of what it means to the people that are still in exile in that place, and what it means to us. Because as we said, Babylon is not just for them then, because we have our own version of Babylon. If you consider being in this country, right, we're subject to the bounds and rules of the country, but certain times the rules of the country goes against the will of God, right? That's a complex idea, because you are to still be loyal to the rules of the country, but your true loyalty should still be transcendent to God. And that's what we want to understand from Babylon, the people that are there, and be able to relate that to us as we go through the next few weeks looking at Babylon. So with that said, I know a little bit of a tangent, but we're going to start off with the Old Testament survey book, looking at the geography of Babylon. Unless there are any thoughts or any comments before we start on everything that's been said. All right. So we're going to continue on looking at the geography of Babylon. Okay, it says, Babylonia was a plain which is bounded on the north by Assyria and Mesopotamia, on the east by Elam, separated by the mountains of Elam, on the south by the sea marshes in the country Chaldea, and on the west by Syrian desert. It is derived its name from the capital of Babylon. It was also called Shinar, and it was later called the land of the Chaldeans. It was thought to be the cradle of civilization, watered by the Tigris and the Euphrates River. It was the probable site of the Garden of Eden and of the Tower of Babel. During the time in which the Babylonian Empire flourished, it sustained a dense population. The area was covered with a network of canals. They had been skillfully planned and regulated. They had brought prosperity due to the enhancing of the fertility of the soil. So, looking at the geography, the first aspect, we see that Babylonia is one that is transcendent when it comes to the amount of the time span that it covers, right? In fact, it was interesting when we read this, when we looked at the Tower of Babel, right, in Genesis 11, one of the first aspects of humanity in this act of rebellion against God, in this idea of knowing, thinking that you know more than God, started from Babel, right? In fact, almost like Babylon was the first response of humankind to create their own version of the Garden of Eden. And we see that because it's so transcendent when it comes to human ingenuity, right? And also of the span that it covers. Because we see that the location, the geographical location, made it such a benefit to this nation. And we see the same with like other nations that have geographical benefits, like Egypt. That's another nation that has a time span that covers millennia. We're talking thousands of years, right? So in the same regard, Babylonia has this same idea of this almost like cradle of civilization, as it calls it. And that is where we want to take the account of how people see the nation, in the sense that people are attracted to things that are amazing, things that are timeless in their mind, right? And in that regard, Babylonia is also seen with this same eyesight of one that is of flourishment, that is one that is of almost like eternity, right? Because sometimes when you are living in that, you sometimes don't see where the source of it all comes from, right? When we look at the benefits of having rivers nearby, if you look at historical background, that is literally the first signs of benefit, as the biggest cities are near coastal lines because of that benefit. But that is not something of your own creation, right? Sometimes in history we see that you are just given an upper hand because you are in a place with a lot of natural resource, with a lot of benefits, right? But sometimes what happens is that these natural resources, we take it as hubris, is to say, I did all this, right? To not see that the things that are beneficial, that have allowed your country to prosper, is not because of something you physically did, but because of something that is given to you. And that's going to be the folly of so many kings, but sadly it's going to be the folly of the same people that God chose as well, because every king starts saying, I start winning these battles. It's because of me I did that. And that hubris is something that we see in Babylon itself. As a cradle of civilization, the mindset is we have done something that is beyond God. And truth be told, that is a pattern that continues on and on even till today, where people admire the ingenuity as seeing something that is beyond God, not knowing that the things that you've given that are of yours are not of your own, but a blessing that you have, right? The ability that God has put in our minds to create, it is not so that we can defile and say we know better than you. It is to be thankful, right? To be able to do the things that we're able to do, right? It's the same mindset when, if you have children, when the children start bringing their own income, they think they're better than you, not knowing that they're able to work because of the education they received, because of the parents that pushed them to get education in the first place. Right? Sometimes our own hubris takes a grander toll on our head, and that does not change with age. Sometimes we think we go wiser with age, but sometimes it doesn't work out like that. So in Babylon's case, geography is very important, as we see that has allowed them to be very skillfully planned, it says, and very regulated, right? And that enhancement of the fertility in the soil was so important that it flourished to such a level that spanned generations and generations to come. We're going to do one more reading of the second section, and then we can close off looking at the historical aspect of Babylon. Okay, second section, number 8. It says, it was established by Nimrod not long after the flood. We're talking about the great flood in Noah. It was located by the Euphrates River with easy reach of the Persian Gulf. It was an important city throughout its history. Many battles were fought for the control of it. It was destroyed and rebuilt a number of times. During the times of Nebuchadnezzar, which is 605 to 562 BC, it was the chief city of the world, covered an area of about 200 square miles on both sides of the Euphrates River, had broad streets which had been laid out so that they intersected one another at right angles, had 3 imposing walls which surrounded it, which were wide enough to allow chariots to pass on top of it. It says it was beautiful. For example, Nebuchadnezzar's hanging gardens, which he built for his Median wife, Amethyst, became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In later history of Babylon, it says it declined, but many still have existed in New Testament times, as 1 Peter 5:13 is to be taken literally, came to symbolize in the book of Revelation the world and its wickedness. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, for Revelation 14:8. The scarlet woman has written on her forehead, Babylon the Great, is now a total desolation, thus fulfillment the prophecy of Isaiah 13:17-22. So, as we can see, that same theme of something being everlasting, something being never ending, is something, a mindset that people have, especially when they are having fun, right? It's that mindset that their actions won't have consequences. If you have ever, gotten drunk, you know the hangover is going to come. But in the moment when you're having fun, that mindset is not, you don't see the consequences of the actions you're taking. In the same regard, it is a glorious city, right? The physical beauty, it says, is unimaginable and it's uncomparable, right? But at the same time, the soul of the city is still corrupt, in the sense that this building of it is not of their own, as Jeremiah and Isaiah foretold that the nations that were going to conquer Jerusalem is going to be lifted by God's hand, right? As if to say that the things that they're experiencing, they think it's like we're the center of the world, right? And that mindset has always been from the past to the present, where people think that they are in the center of the time and the center of the place and all significance. But if there's no sense of self-reflection, if there's no sense of a self-examination, then the actions that they're taking is going to have consequences. Because here, even in the final book of the Bible, it talks about the falling of the Babylon the Great, right? About everything that we think as humans is great is all going to fall, right? Because that is not the eternity, right? That is not the the home that we're banished to, because the restorative action, right? Because after talking about everything that humanity has built going into ashes, then the Revelation talks about creating a new world, about a new kingdom, right? That is that aspect of that exile mindset. And the people that do understand it, right, their lives are transformed through it, because they're not living a life based on the things that are around them, but they're living a life that's transformed by the Word of God. And that is that same challenge that is upon us as well. Because if you only see these people as people that have failed and not examine yourself and your failures whenever we fail, then we are no better than the Babylonians, because we have not examined ourselves. We've only looked at the benefits that we've had, we only looked at the accomplishment that we had, but we haven't forgotten to give thanks to where it actually came from. So that kind of concludes as far as like the geography of Babylon. Hopefully we can gain some important lessons that we can apply to our lives. Next week we're going to kind of look at the historical aspect of it, looking at how significant it was. We talked about the span of time that Babylon faced, that Babylon went through. So we see that there's a lot of difficulties, there's a lot of strifes, and there's a lot of changes that takes place in this great empire. And we can, hopefully we can relate to our own lives and looking at the Babylons that we ourselves are part of. Once do we have any thoughts, Brother Carter?
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said earlier about Babylon, which geographical and all of that. I think it's important to know, similar to what you said, it was located in a prime location. Right? They had ammunition, they had a lot of natural resources, things that they could use to build themselves and become very powerful. And those things weren't there because they made it or it came from somewhere. We're in section B, where it talks about how beautiful it was, and then Nebuchadnezzar's gardens that he built for his medium wife. Mm-hmm. Like, as I look at that, I start to think, like, how did he build it, right? Where did he start from? And as I take away little by little and piece by piece, and as humans, as we do that, we recognize that, again, those things didn't come from us. You may think that it is. He was probably excited and proud of what he created for his wife. But where did all of those things come from? They all came from God. If we break it down to the very minerals, to the very thin air that it is, or wherever it is, like if we keep going back and back and back, because science, we create things from what? Things that already are, things that already exist. And if we make something much better, then we think to ourselves, yes, I did that, I made this. But where did you start from? You started from something that was already here. And sometimes I think in our lives, God put us in prime positions, in prime situations, in places where we can thrive, right? And we can do some really great things. Places where there's a lot of natural resources there already for us. But instead of giving God the glory, instead of recognizing Him as who He is and praising Him for those things that we have, for the opportunities, the advantages that we already have, besides other people, and we think to ourselves, yes, I did this, I have this, I got this position, and all of that. And in Luke 12:48, it talks about, to whom much is given, much will be required, and to whom much is trusted, much will be demanded, right? And so Babylon, having all those natural resources and things that were already there for them, much was trusted to them, much was required. But instead of doing, what God wants them to do with it, they did otherwise, and we see what happened with them. Similar to us, the things that God gives us, the things that He entrusts to us in our lives, if we don't manage it well, if we don't give back as needed, then we're not, sin is gonna, we will be judged, essentially. And I think that's very applicable to our lives. So I just made that.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a good point. And one of the things that you mentioned that we sometimes forget is not only do we fail to think of the abstractions of things that we don't realize is from God, but we fail to thank literally the person that's giving it to us. Right? I mean, this is like base level, right? Because you talked about where did that hanging gardens come from? Somebody poured a lot of labor into this. In ancient Egypt, like the pyramids, it's not made by magic. There's a lot of engineering, but also hard labor. And a lot of the times when we are in the mindset of hubris, we say we're able to do something beyond God, and we don't think about what is the sacrifice of it. Like when we think about like even America, right? To think about the amazing things that historically the country is able to do in industrialization, we don't see the people that labor till death and like risk their lives even today, right? Like that's not like this is not a hot take. This is a reality that the things that we consider are like the boom of humanity, like the technology that we have, it is built through sacrifice of people that are laboring unfairly. As in the people that are giving so much of their physical self and getting nothing in return for somebody else's gain, for the people that are in higher standing. And the justice of the world says that's fair market capitalism, in the sense that that's equality when it comes to you're born in this place, that is the highest wage that will offer you in that place. And that's how the world market works. And especially if you have this hubris to say, I'm going to take my company to the highest of level, I'm going to scrutinize even more the people in the lowest so I can take it to the highest. That's the mindset of kings. Just thinking about like the Sphinx and this giant monumental thing built for one body, like for burial of this one lineage, right? And thousands of people that died, God's people, mind you, because that's where the whole story of the Israelites coming out of captivity in Egypt comes from. The people died for this one hubris of this man to say, I will live eternally in this burial place. Right? That is not something that we want to take short count, because when we talk about Babylon, we forget, right? We forget that the justice that was being right for the progress of Babylon was not the justice of God. In the sense that when we are faced, especially as God mentioned, if you are in a place of power, how you treat those that are under you, right? That's a reflection of either you or like that in God within you, or it's a reflection of the world that is kind of honed you to being the person that you are, right? Because that's why we see there are businesses that still take the word of God seriously, but there are businesses that don't, right? But the truth of it is, when you're in this hubris mode, when you're in this empire mode, you don't take into account these things. You don't take into account the injustice that you're doing, because that is just in the world, but that is not just when it comes to that. So yeah, important concept, important things to take away from. Hopefully there's more that we can talk about. Unless there was any final parting thoughts, we are going to close today with a word of prayer. Let's go, Father, we pray. Dear Holy Father, we come to you thanking you, Father, once again for this morning. We're grateful, Father, and we're grateful that we have the things that we have, and we are grateful for the things that we have within us. And Father, we ask that we continue to have this mindset, Father, that we don't, this lesson that we see from the kingdom of Babylon, that we don't take things for granted. And we see the blessings that we have in our life is through you. And Father, and all glory and praise may forever be for you. Father, we pray that this lesson will stick in our hearts and minds for the rest of the week and the remnant of our lives. We're praying for all these words that you have given us, that we continue to learn from each and every day. Father, we're grateful for your lessons, that they're transcendent throughout time. And Father, the same struggles of the past are the same struggles today, and the same hubris of the past is the same hubris that we have today. And Father, we pray as your Son Jesus, that we be able to keep our hearts humble, keep our mind humble, Father, that we be able to give our life as a sacrifice, Father, as a servant. Father, we're grateful for the lesson. We're grateful for the worship service after this, which we will be presenting unto you in spirit and in truth. We pray that we be able to have our hearts and minds focused only to you and not be distracted by the things of the world. We're praying for those that are still on their way. We're praying for safe travels. We're praying for those that will be leading your service. Father, in all things, we thank you. We thank you for all things. All these words we pray unto you In your Son, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and the congregation say, Amen.
Oh, of course. Good morning, good morning. Doesn't matter. That's what I said, doesn't matter what you bring. So she wanted extra stuff, so the extra stuff.